I would like to announce or introduce Logan Myers. We had a great write-up about Logan and all the work that he's done up there on the Arkansas River Valley. He's probably the foremost expert in all the advocacy and what goes on up there, and he loves the place, and his passions certainly show in the work that he does and the excitement that he shares. So welcome, Logan. I'm going to turn my mic off and sit back and listen to you.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate the very generous introduction. Just to introduce myself a little further, I'm a whitewater paddler. I like to stand up paddleboard. I whitewater kayak. I enjoy rafting, canoeing, pretty much anything that you can do on the water. I enjoy that very much. I am also a conservationist. I put a lot of time into cleaning up, cleaning up public lands, engaging organizations, nonprofits that can get funds raised to improve access sites, youth work with getting kids out in the backcountry, in particular Browns Canyon. I've been a volunteer with Friends of Browns Canyon for a long time. I volunteered for a long time with the Greater Arkansas River Nature Association, just to name a few. So anyway, enough about me. So what I'm going to do with this presentation is I've got a list of topics from the voluntary flow plan to the history of boating and things like that. And I'm going to go through kind of one topic at a time with you guys. And I'm going to do a slideshow of photos while I do that. And at the end of each kind of topic, I'll give anyone a chance to ask any questions that you might have before we move on to something that might generate a new question. So for all intents and purposes during this presentation, the Upper Arkansas River is defined as the river that begins north of Pueblo, or north of Leadville at Fremont Pass on the north face of Mount Arkansas. And the end of the Upper Arkansas River is Pueblo Reservoir, which is also the end of the Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area State Park. The lower arc, at least in Colorado, runs from Pueblo down to the Kansas state line. And in a relatively unrelated notion, the Arkansas River actually runs completely bone dry in western Kansas for around 200 plus miles before you start seeing water in it again, which can be quite a shock if you drive out of Salida in June or July and see 2,000 or 3,000 in the river, and drive 6 or 8 miles and the river's nothing but a sand pit. But so that's a location of the river. Although the source is on Mount Arkansas on Fremont Pass, the majority of the water that's actually in the river comes down Lake Creek. So it's debatable amongst many people if the source of it's actually Lake Creek or the headwaters of the Ark, but they usually go by the distance that the river runs to its head. So that's where that came from. Independence Pass is at the head of Lake Creek. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Independence Pass, but that is a paved highway open only in the summer that runs from the Arkansas Valley to Aspen and the Roaring Fork Valley. It is also the source of major diversions. There is a lot of water that comes into Lake Creek that originates in other parts of the state. Pardon me, my dog is going crazy now too. So in the course of the 148 miles that run from its source north of Leadville down to Pueblo Reservoir, there are over 80 named rapids on the Arkansas. There's a lot of interesting geology. I'm not a geologist, but the Upper Arkansas Valley is considered the northernmost extension of the Rio Grande Rift. The Rio Grande Rift, as I'm sure many of you know, runs down the Rio Grande Valley. The Laramide orogeny, which was the major event around here that raised the mountains, increased erosion, and the Arkansas prior to that was pretty well ponded and didn't have a lot of gradient to it. And then there's a lot of debate on where the Arkansas River actually ran. Last I knew, the accepted belief is that the Arkansas River originally ran south over Poncha Pass, over the San Luis Valley, and down the course of the Rio Grande. And then I think it was towards the end of the Laramide-Orogeny, when the Sangre de Cristo Range rose, it was diverted or ponded again and pirated actually by headwater streams in the what's now called the Bighorn Sheep Canyon and the Royal Gorge section of the river. So interesting stuff there. A lot of Native Americans used to live in the Arkansas Valley. There were several tribes that frequented the area. The Ute Indians were the ones that actually lay claim to the valley. See if it'll let me start changing slides. Ute Indians, although there were, I believe, Apache and Comanche that came up seasonally. Most of the Ute Indians also traveled around seasonally and didn't stay here, although there were bands that stayed year-round, especially because of the hot springs in the area. We have hot springs located at Mount Princeton and Cottonwood, which are both in immediate vicinity of the Buena Vista Salida area, as well as there were hot springs at Poncha Springs as well. Let's see. There are many archaeological sites along the river and along the valley, particularly in Browns Canyon National Monument. They have been documented by the government, but the documents have not been released to the public. But there are a lot of places, especially in that part of the river corridor, where there are lithographic sites, former encampments of the Indians. And so there's a lot of Native American history here. And in the planning process, we, of both the state park and the national monument, we included the Native American tribes in the planning as much as we could. So the first white explorer to actually set foot, well, Zebulon Pike is what's current is the common accepted first explorer. There was probably some fur trappers or other white men that made it here before him, but that was in the early 1800s. Then it took a while before mining really took off. Mining started to explode in the area in the 1850s, especially along the Arkansas River in the Leadville area come 1860s to 1880. The railroad arrived in Leadville in 1880. But the first major gold strike there in California Gulch was in 1859. And at one time, Leadville was actually considered for the state capital. But all of that mining left a legacy of destruction and contamination in that area. And there is, I don't think I covered this anywhere else. There is now well, there's a Superfund site up at Leadville at California Gulch where the first gold was struck. I believe that it was put in the 80s, and it really has improved the water quality in the Arkansas River ever since then. When I even first moved here, which was around, I think it was in 2001, I was told not to eat fish in the river at that point, but it's a gold medal fishery now. So a lot of the mining's been cleaned up. Although there are still actually active mines in downstream areas, if anyone's familiar with where like Howard and Coaldale are, Cotopaxi, kind of that area. It's halfway between Salida and Canyon City. There's still gypsum and calcite mines both down there that are active. And there are still actually some sites on major tributaries as well, such as Half Moon Creek and Chalk Creek. Chalk Creek in particular, that's where St. Elmo, the ghost town, is. There's Mary Murphy mine up there, which is still the largest pollutant on the entire Arkansas River. But they manage it pretty well. It's considered safe. As far as boating goes, boating on the Arkansas River started as early as the 1930s, 1940s. Back in those days, they used fold-up boats, which I had a photo of a fold-up boat in here. They used fold-up boats before fiberglass, and there was pretty extensive use of them, actually, especially by locals here in the community. The first fib arc race was held in 1949, which originally went all the way from Salida down to Canyon City. They shortened it to 26 miles in the 70s, so now you take out down at Cotopaxi. Eric Seidel, though, was credited with the first kayak run down Browns Canyon in 1954 in a fold boat. He's got a rapid named after him now, actually 2 rapids on the river named after him. And then in the 50s and 60s, when fiberglass became the kayaks of choice, I heard multiple stories of the high school shop kids building their own fiberglass boats and having their boating clubs and going out. It was in the 70s that commercial businesses started offering commercial trips on the river. The first of those were, I actually got some exact information from Reed Dills, who I work with on Friends of Browns Canyon. He said that in 76, he worked for River Runners, and they were one of only 2. It was Four Corners Rafting and River Runners in 76 that ran below Cotopaxi, and those were the only stretches that they boated. But then, gosh, by the late 70s, you had Al McClellan with Rocky Mountain Adventures and a couple of other companies. And then by the time the 80s ran around, there was pretty heavy use. 1987, there were over 100,000 guests down the river. And at that point, there was no actual regulation of the commercial boating of the river. Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area was, it says that it was 1988, the BLM were the ones that first started permitting outfitters in 1984. And then in 1988, they set up the first cooperative management plan with state parks to create the Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area State Park in 1989. At this point, the Arkansas Headwaters has got 39 boat ramps, 280 picnic sites, 296 campsites, a visitor center with only 9 year-round employees and 25 seasonals. Photo we're looking at now is rafting on the Numbers section of the river. Fishery, I don't know if you guys are interested in fishing at all. This is Zoom Flume in Browns Canyon there. But the river is considered a gold medal fishery, 102 miles of it from the Hayden Meadows site south of Leadville to Parkdale, just above the Royal Gorge, which means that there are 60 pounds of trout per acre, along with 12 14-inch or larger trout per acre. It's a whole lot of fish in the river. It means that the river is a lot healthier than it used to be. There are rainbows in the river as well, and they still do have some native white suckers and greenback cutthroat as well. But honestly, I've fished quite a bit. I've never caught one of those myself, but they are out there. Back when the mining was still, well, after the mining, but after effects of it, there was basically no fish that could survive in the river from the runoff from the Leadville area until you got downstream of Cotopaxi, and even then they'd be small trout, and a lot of times they could only live to be 1 or 2 years old and could barely reproduce. When they put the Superfund site in, within about 5 years, the water quality cleared up enough that you had trout that could reproduce 3-5 years at a time and survived all the way upstream to the Numbers area of the river. So it really improved the quality of the water that we deal with. All right, as far as that kind of stuff goes, did anyone have any questions on any of that?
It's great to hear all the statistics that you've got as far as campsites and fish and everything. That's a lot of interesting information, Logan.
Yeah, I know that you guys probably aren't too interested in the fishing too, but you know, it all ties together with conservation of the resource and having a healthy environment for the enjoyment of not only the boaters, but everybody that uses the river. So anyway, I'm going to get on now to the Fry Arc project. This photo is of a couple of guys that I work with all the time. John Nami Nahamanuk was the BLM. He's the one from the BLM that instituted all of the boating like system that we have on the Arkansas right now. And the other guy is John Kresge, who's still there. And he's the one that actually does all of the rationing and coordinating of telling people when they're getting too many boats on the river and lays a smackdown on them for it. So the next topic though on hand is the Fry Arc project. Oh, these are all fishing photos I should have shared with you guys earlier. This is Larry Fredericks with a brown trout. Brown trout is the most common fish in the river. Rainbow trouts are only a minority. The rainbow trout cannot survive on their own for some reason. The fish guys know better than me, but brown trout survive to get really rather large for brown anymore, even though they're an invasive species of German brown trout. But the rainbows are put in from fish hatcheries up and down the river. There's 3 of them, one at Leadville, one at Chalk Creek near Mount Princeton Hot Springs, and then another one outside Salida. And really pretty down there in the fall, especially for fishermen. So this Fry Arc tunnel, or the Fry Arc project, is where a lot of the water in the Arkansas comes from. The photo here is the Twin Lakes tunnel. There are 3 tunnels, 3 tunnel outlets that dump water from western slope tributaries into the Arkansas Basin underneath the Continental Divide. That tunnel right there, at that point, I bet that's flowing 600 CFS right there. The Fry Arc project is what the entire system is called, of all these tunnels that move the water from the west slope to the east slope. It's a trans-mountain diversion system that was envisioned in the Dust Bowl of the 30s and then finally brought to life in '62 with a signature from President Kennedy. In '68, the BOR raised Sugarloaf Dam at Turquoise Lake and constructed the Mount Elbert Conduit, which the Mount Elbert Conduit runs over to the power plant at Twin Lakes. It's called Mount Elbert Power Plant there. I'll explain it probably a little bit more as we get through this. The Twin Lakes Tunnel, which is actually the one in the photo here, was built in the 30s. But I think it was originally going to have, it was for trains or for vehicles or something. I don't think they intended it for water originally, but they are able to divert 50,000 acre feet from the Roaring Fork headwaters, including the Lincoln Creek area, every year. 50,000 acre feet is a lot of water. I don't know if you guys have been to Twin Lakes before, but the full capacity of Twin Lakes before it like hits its spill level is just over 100,000 acre feet. So they bring a lot of water that Aspen residents probably are missing pretty bad over. But that water is owned primarily by Aurora and Colorado Springs. Some of it's owned by Pueblo. It's municipalities that bought water rights a long time ago. I believe their water rights are, I didn't write the date down, but most of those are dated from the early 50s, I believe. And yeah, that is a lot of water that did not originate in the Arkansas. Another one of the tunnels is the Homestake Tunnel. The Homestake Tunnel, and the other one is the Carlton Tunnel, which has changed names a couple of times. They both dump into Turquoise Lake outside of Leadville. The Carlton Tunnel brings water from the Frying Pan River headwaters, Williams Mountains and Upper Frying Pan, and the Homestake Tunnel takes water from the Eagle River headwaters and brings all of these over into the Arkansas Basin. They've got power plant at Sugarloaf Dam at Turquoise, so any water that they move through there generates electricity. And then what they do with a lot of water, that this West Slope water that ends up in Turquoise, they've got a pipeline that runs over to a small holding pond above Twin Lakes Reservoir. And it actually, they've got like a pump system where they pump the water up into the lake at night and they let it drain down at high demand periods. And the water that they bring from the Eagle and from the Frying Pan goes through this pipe over to this lake, and then they run it through a power plant. And then a lot of it goes into a pump station, and they take it over then into the South Platte Basin and take it to Denver. And a good portion of it does never even see the Arkansas itself, but it is it's 183 CFS that they can run through the pump station at any given time. And at this time of the year, they're running at full blast 24 hours a day, moving water through there so they can get it over to the thirsty people on the Front Range. But there is a lot of water that's owned by Pueblo, and then there's a lot of this water also that they're moving that they just can't move through the conduit there. So they've been in the Front Range entities, or who I'm referring to, Aurora, Colorado Springs, have been building a conduit pipe that actually runs from Denver essentially down to Pueblo, and they're going to allow this West Slope water to drain down to that point and then siphon it out of the river there and take it up. So big infrastructure, big money, lots of people taking water that doesn't belong to them. But we do get a benefit from it recreationally, because a good portion of the water does still run down the Arkansas. It just doesn't necessarily run at the time of the year that it's going to benefit boaters the most. Any questions on that particular part of it? I was going to get onto the voluntary flow plan next.
Hey, Logan, I was actually driving through that section of river just last weekend, coming back from the Frying Pan Valley. And there's a weird constriction of the river above Twin Lakes, where it's really rocky and narrow. I couldn't find out what it was called on the map. Do you know what the name of that is?
Was it natural or man-made looking?
It's natural. There's a little bridge over it, but it's only 5 miles upstream from Twin Lakes, maybe 5 to 10 miles.
Well, where the footbridge is at it's a gauging station. But just downstream of where that is, was there like a little Lowhead Dam looking thing right underneath the footbridge?
Yeah, there's a bunch of rocks with a Lowhead Dam, and it kind of turns through like a 4 or 5 foot constriction, it seems like, before it opens up again.
Yeah, that's just a gauging station there. They put it in the 90s, and that's the main spot right there where they tell you the flow of Lake Creek above Twin Lakes.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that section had been run very often, or I wasn't familiar with it.
It does get run, and I've got a couple of photos of Lake Creek actually to share. Once I get through all the technical type of stuff, I was going to go through every stretch of the river, including a couple of the tributary creeks that flow into it, which are Lake Creek and Clear Creek. And yeah, I'm familiar for sure with what you're talking about. The drop right below that's called Cauldron.
Yeah, it looked pretty stout.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute though.
Thanks.
You bet. All right. So due to the excess water that has to be moved downriver, regardless of the time, it has to be moved at some point or another. But the water managers at the same time, they don't want to drain the reservoir down too far at any point, or move too much down when they may have water holders between reservoirs that need water there. So they try to be conservative about moving too much water at once. So we've worked out plans to where it seems to kind of benefit everybody. It's called a voluntary flow management plan. And it's a cooperative effort for managing and augmenting flows in the Arkansas River. The signatories to it, I don't have the entire list in front of me, but it is the municipalities: Pueblo, Colorado Springs, Denver, I believe the Southeast Water Conservancy District. There's a few others of that nature, but that isn't particularly important. The important part is that for whitewater boating, they target a flow of 700 CFS at the Wellsville gauge from July 1st to August 15th every year. This is basically just in benefit of recreation and the commercial rafting industry. They are not able to necessarily maintain it every single year. I've been here for a little over 20 years now, and in 2002 and in 2012, which were bone dry years, there was just absolutely no water, and they were not able to maintain it. But they still moved as much water as they could, and we were still able to boat those years. It was just like a minimum flow. But the goal, though, beyond the 700 CFS during July 1st, August 15th, is to never have a minimum flow of less than 250 at the Wellsville gauge either, which back when it was a free-flowing river, in drought winters, you would get flows that would drop in the teens to 20s, that sort of thing. And it was difficult on the fishery as well. So this part of the plan is for fish health, which is also basically the rest of the voluntary flow plan, which is what they do now, a winter water program. This has started just since I've been involved with it. But they, they used to move excess water at the end of the season, like in November or December or that time of year, that was in storage to make room for Western Slope imports in the spring. But there'd been a couple of years like 2002 and 2012 where they shot themselves in the foot. And when I say they, I'm referring to the Bureau of Reclamation, the BOR, shot themselves in the foot because they moved too much water too early, and then we never got any snow. And so then there wasn't any water come spring for anybody when they could have conserved it a little better. But so what they do now is the winter water program moves water between February and April 1st. So the photo that we're looking at now is me and a couple of friends running numbers in February when they're running 400, 500 CFS down the river in the middle of February, which we get nice days here. I imagine this day that I took this photo, it was probably about 60 degrees outside with no wind. So, you know, we get out and enjoy it. Since they've been doing this, it gives you consistent water. And if you take advantage of the nice days, you can have some fun days boating in the winter. And the fishermen like it too, having a little bit extra water out there. The water that comes out of the bottom of the dam is always like 42 degrees. And so it livens the fish up a little bit too, to get out and look for nymphs and things to feed on. The reason, though, that they drop the flows at April 1st instead of starting it at April 1st and just continuing it through the season is because of the brown trout. The fry emerge from their larvae or from their eggs, usually at the beginning of April. So they want to drop the river flow back down to a native flow, more natural flow at that time of the year, so that they don't get washed out when they're first hatching. It improves everything as far as the numbers of trout and the size that they get to be in the river. And then the end of the flow plan, August 15th, is also trout based. So we've fought for longer seasons and higher flows in the river, but the Trout Unlimited actually has sued the state over the flow program before because of the flows. So it's a compromise, but it ends August 15th because trout start spawning usually in September. It's usually mid-September, but the business for commercial rafting is usually dropped off too by end of August, beginning of September. Kids are going back to school. So it's kind of commercially based in why they move water when they do, but it provides the Arkansas River with an artificially long season. And I like to take as much advantage of it as I can. Okay, that's it for the flow management plan. Any questions on that? Nope. Okay. Next is Browns Canyon National Monument. So I don't know how many have been to Browns Canyon before, but there is a lot more to Browns Canyon than just the river corridor through it. The best parts of it are accessed from the river, though, definitely. But it was a long campaign to get it protected as a national monument. People started in the 70s advocating for wilderness designations. It was went through the Rare One roadless inventory. In the 80s, it was designated a wilderness study area. Throughout the 90s and the early 2000s, there was at least a half dozen bills introduced to actually federally designate the area as a wilderness. None of them are successful. They've all stalled in the House or the Senate. After 40 years of attempting, at one point here, I think it was in 2008, Interior Secretary Ken Salazar and Colorado Senator Mark Udall came to Friends of Browns Canyon and suggested that we ask President Obama to protect it as a national monument through the Antiquities Act. So towards the end of his term, there was some lobbying going on. I went up to Washington on behalf of the Wilderness Society and spoke with Republican senators about the importance of protecting public lands. This photo is with Arizona Representative Rao. Gosh, I should have wrote his name down. He's probably still in seat. Super nice guy from Arizona. We were pretty successful, actually. I would say that out of dealing with 12, 13 Republican senators, there was only 2 of them that didn't want to be engaged about public land protection. But anyway, it was successful because towards the end of his term, Obama signed the proclamation February 19th, 2015, designating a national monument. Really nothing changes with the land itself, and that's kind of the whole point of the protection, is to keep it as it is for indefinitely. It's going to still be managed by the Forest Service on Forest Service lands. It's still managed by BLM on BLM lands, and the Arkansas Headwaters State Park still manages the river corridor. All right, so that's it for the boring stuff on Browns Canyon. Any questions on that part? All right. River stretches and access points. Now we're going to talk about the river itself, top to bottom. North to south. Oh, well, that's Browns Canyon still. I should have changed that earlier. Browns Canyon. Browns Canyon. Yeah, this is actually Railroad Gulch in Browns Canyon, which is a side hike near Seidel's Suckhole. There used to be a narrow gauge line. It was the steepest line in the nation when it operated for like 25, 30 years. The Calumet branch went up to a iron mine and then down to the main branch and down to Pueblo. But this is a beautiful area to hike into from a campsite in Browns Canyon. A lot of people don't get there, don't know about it. Yes, this is a map of the state park top to bottom. Top left, you're going to find Turquoise Lake. It's hard to read. It's really small all the way down. 148, 50 miles later is Pueblo Reservoir. This right here is about as high up as you want to put in to go boating on the river. This is Hayden Meadows below Leadville, and probably the highest flow I've ever seen it. The river was 1600 above the confluence with Lake Creek at the time. But it is a decent stretch. It runs down 10 miles to Granite, and you've got one access point halfway through called Kobe, which has got a low bridge. So this is the one thing that makes it unattractive for rafts. But you can get through it at most flows with a kayak or a ducky. But it's class 2, very scenic. You're looking off at mountains on both sides that exceed timberline, and on your right are the 2 tallest mountains in the state, Mount Massive and Mount Elbert. Once you get down to Lake Creek, the volume usually doubles or more, especially during runoff. The day that I took this photo at Granite, I think there was 3,000 coming out of Lake Creek. And so this photo is Lake Creek. Lake Creek is the main tributary to the Ark, and it has 2 boatable sections for hair boaters on it. This photo is what's referred to as Tombstone Gorge because it has a river-wide boulder sieve at the entrance to the drop that has to be portaged, and then you slide off the little boulder on the right of the photo back into class 5 water. It's a little above my pay grade, but I've got some friends that like to run it, and this is a photo I took of them doing it. There's also another stretch a little further down. This is a rapid called NIMBY on Lake Creek, also obviously class 5. I didn't put any photos in here of the lower Lake Creek stretches, which are actually considered harder than the drops in the upper part. Any of you that have read the guidebooks have probably heard the names of like Paralyzer and Cauldron. They're stout, big, steep, class 5 drops. Paralyzer in particular, I think it drops like 200 feet in 200 feet and 200 feet or something like that. Pretty steep. But there's guys that boat them, and they boat them every season. So, you know, if any of you listening to me are super adventurous and super aggressive creek boaters, this is a destination for that kind of thing. And there are people, like with all the raft guides that we have here, and people that come and live in their campers for 2 months or whatever, there's always people running the river, always, pretty much in every stretch. So I mentioned Lake Creek because Lake Creek comes in between Hayden Meadows and Granite. When you put in at Granite, you put in on a class 3-4 run. This photo is actually of Clear Creek of the Ark, which comes into the Arkansas on this run below Granite. Clear Creek of the Ark, again, has got 2 different sections, an upper and a lower. Generally, they're ran all together. It is considered 5- and pretty continuous. A lot of people end up bruised and battered if they have a bad run. It's steep and manky and rocky, and it gets ran a lot as well. So I thought I would include it in here so you guys are familiar with it. But on the main river, Granite to Pine Creek is a fine run in and of itself that very, very few people do, because you don't have to run Pine Creek. A lot of people don't know that. You can take out right at the top of Pine Creek. But the run itself is 4 miles long, considered class 3-4. Most of it in between is class 3. This is one of the busier in between sections on the run. So this would be, you know, read and run class 3 through here on it. You have 2 bigger rapids on it. First one's called Maytag, which is in the top half, like the top of the run. And it's a heavy rapid straight down the middle, no moves to be made, but it's like 3 ledge holes in a row. They do consider it class 3, although in my personal opinion, it boats like 4- because you have to punch several holes. About halfway through the run is the granite diversion dam, which is the intake for the Otero pump station I talked about earlier. It's where they can move water from the Arkansas River over to Aurora and Colorado Springs in the South Platte. This photo is of the new structure that they just built at the intake at Granite. It used to just be like a really gnarly low head dam that had basically fallen apart. Like the concrete had gotten washed apart into chunks at high water events, and it had rebar sticking out and was just not a very attractive rapid at all. And it had actually eroded to the point where their intake structure wasn't working very well anymore. So the state park worked together with the municipalities to raise money to completely rebuild the river feature in a friendly fashion. This photo only represents a couple of the drops in the boat chute side, but I believe there are 7 drops on the boat chute at Granite now. And the river right side is a fish ladder, which at boatable flows is going to be just like 2+, continuous 2+ splashy through it. The drops in the boat chute are actually pretty tall. They're a little bit more aggressive than I expected them to be, but it is really a neat resource because you can drive right up to this feature and put in at the top and take out at the bottom. So right below this structure is where the Clear Creek Arc, the last class 5 whitewater I just showed you, runs in. There is access there as well for fishing, but it's not a great place to put in for boating. Once you reach the end of the Granite to Pine Creek stretch, Pine Creek Rapid is the largest rapid on the Arkansas River. There is a parking lot at the top of the rapid, and there is a old dirt road. I think there's a big rock that fell down in the road, so nobody can drive down it anymore. But it's railroad property, but it's not posted, no trespassing, and there's never been any issues. So people just park in the parking lot up at the top of the road, and they walk down to the rapid and can just run laps on the rapid. Or if you're like me and don't really run Pine Creek, you can run Granite and take out right there and walk up to your shuttle vehicle. Pine Creek, though, used to be considered class 5. People around here anymore don't call it class 5 unless it's like really high water to where flush drowning is a major concern. But it's still harder water than what I usually run. I've been through parts of it. I've never ran the whole thing top to bottom. I've seen it many times though. So a lot of people run Pine Creek just by itself, or they use it for a put into the numbers. The numbers is where we start getting into the more commonly ran stretches of the river. Granite down is actually pretty popular, but it's only with AVA and Timberline and Cody. There's like 3 companies that run that stretch. Most of them go downstream to Numbers and Browns Canyon or down further. The photo we're looking at now is high water at rapid number 4. There's a couple of friends of mine running through the meat of some big waves. That's Tom Doherty and Jeff Flora there. Numbers though is, I should have mentioned too that at the bottom of Pine Creek you've got another major rapid called Triple Drop. It's a class 4. The top drop of it is the steepest. It's kind of a V or a big V wave at higher water, and a couple of large holes after. And then you have another rapid below that we refer to as Car Crash, and then number 0. And those can be accessed from a place that's referred to as a stealth. It's not a official Arkansas access point because it's railroad property, but I've lived here for 20 years and there's never been any enforcement on it. So people just pull over next to the railroad tracks there and walk down. And it's a good place to put in for like a jump start to the numbers. It's below Pine Creek, but you still get the number 0 rapid, which is a good quality rapid, just as good as number 1, in my opinion. So the numbers launch, which they just built a new one last year, I believe, maybe 2 years ago now. The numbers launch is just a short ways above number 1 rapid. The numbers, if you're not familiar, are a series of class 4 rapids numbered 1 through 7. There's some halves in there too, and some other places that have distinct names also, but the primary drops are numbered 1 through 7. You have multiple access points along the run. There's camping available at rapid number 4 and at rapid number 6. These are now designated dispersed sites. So you don't get overran with people in the middle of the night, at least the way I look at it. More access at 5.5. In my opinion, 5 is kind of the crux of the run, but everybody thinks it's different. As you get into high numbers, can be ran at a variety of flows. Living here in Buena Vista, I have ran it as low as 85 CFS. Anymore, 120 CFS is the minimum to go out and have a good time in a hard shell boat. I've got friends that are C1ers in canoes that go with the same flows. And if you're really skilled in a nimble ducky, you can get down there at pretty good low flow. But at those low flows, it's mostly 3+, except for like pin potential if you're not following a good line. Medium water, the run is basically class 4, like it's 3+ in the in-betweens, and all the rapids are 4. And then as you start getting what flows over 2,000 CFS, you get a lot of 4+ in there. You get very large stacked holes one after another that you can't see the next one coming. You just have to be able to continue to proceed forward through them, or stop and get surfed and be able to get out of it stuff. The unofficial takeout for the numbers run is at what we would call locally Miners Campground. The AHRA calls it Riverside, which is a mile above Railroad Bridge. It's a free site. They've got some walk-in camping there, and they now have porta potties there as well. Any questions on the numbers or Pine Creek or Granite? Nope. All right. Next run after numbers is the fractions. That starts at Railroad Bridge and it goes to the town of Buena Vista. It's primarily class 3. Little bit of class 4 at medium water, high flows, a little bit more class 4. When you start out at, well, it's 7 miles, the whole thing from Railroad Bridge to Buena Vista. When you start out at the Railroad Bridge, the first thing you get into is what's referred to here as a Miracle Mile. I think it is right around a mile of pretty continuous 3+ whitewater. It's very comparable to the in-between stuff in the number stretch. And then after that, it calms down and you've got some really good surf waves. And then Frog Rock is kind of considered the midway point of that run. Frog Rock is a rapid with a sieve on the right. There are some large blocks of rock that have fallen from the wall and created a cave underneath the rock. And there have been multiple accidents over the years. It's a class 2+ rapid at most flows, but the consequence of being out of your boat are very high. And the last time there was an accident, there was a raft guide who was doing an after work float, and she had no helmet on and fell out of her raft, hit her head and floated into it unconscious, and got pushed into a 35-foot deep cave underneath the rock. And the state park had to build a cofferdam to retrieve her body. So that is not a good place to go, but I boat by it as much as possible and have never had an issue. Once you get past Frog Rock, you've got some more access points down there. And actually, I should have said at Frog Rock, you have Elephant Rock Campground, which is a nice campground. They've got some walk-in campsites. They've got some designated sites up just a little bit, like 100 yards from the river, something like that. There's no boat ramp there, but there is decent river access. Once you proceed past there, you've got what's referred to as a tunnels river access on River Right. It's basically located from Little Seidel's Rapid down to the Narrows Rapid. It's kind of like a mile long, what do you call it? It's a free campground. There's designated sites, but you don't have to pay for it. Designated dispersed. Really nice area. A lot of people don't know it's there. It's not marked off the highway at all. Yes, it would be a good place to camp if you are boating in the Buena Vista area. Then really your crux, I think I skipped a few photos. The crux of the lower fractions run is House Rock Rapid. This is some more numbers here. This is the run out to the bottom at number 6 and looking down towards number 7 at a medium water flow. This is the fractions in the fall, which is, in my opinion, one of the most gorgeous times to be on the river. Even if it is pretty low water, we can run the fractions down really low. I've done it down to 56 or 60 CFS and didn't have to get out of my boat. But you get, as you can see, you get a lot of pretty color, and so you get some nice days up here in the off season. A lot of people don't know that. And it would be nice to see more boaters on the river at those times. And this is more fractions. This is in the lower stretch, surfing. I believe this is just above Frog Rock a little ways, Mount Princeton in the distance. And this is House Rock Rapid, which is where I meant to be when I got to it. House Rock's the crux of the lower part of the run. The rock splits the river in two. This is obviously really low water when I took this photo, but you can kind of see the gist of it. The right side creates a giant boiling eddy behind the rock, and the left side makes like a pour over where the log's at on the left side. A lot of people don't have trouble with it. It intimidates me at higher water, so you get a big boil line back behind it that goes a ways. There's a really nice portage trail over on the right side, and it's quick and easy portage if you're not comfortable with it. Then once you end that run, you end up at the Buena Vista River Park, which the Buena Vista River Park is always changing and growing and improving. But right now, it's got 5 different river features. You've got your Uptown Wave, you've got the Staircase Wave, the Pocket Wave, the South Main Wave, and then the Lodo Wave, all in a row. And each one's got a different character to them. And in fact, we were working on some different things at Paddle Fest, and I had a fundraiser to raise money because we're trying to improve the Pocket Wave right now. It's not very useful at low water. It's a high water feature only, and we want to try to make it more useful at a more variety of flows. But at the Buena Vista River Park, you've got 2 boat ramps. You've got a boat ramp at the northern end of the river park near the trailhead, and then on the southern end of the river park at the South Main River Development, you have also got a boat ramp, and there's a trail that runs along the course of the park, and we have changing rooms, restrooms, and pretty darn good access with a lot of fun to have there. The run, if you put in at Buena Vista, going downstream, it doesn't really have a name. We call it the BV Town Run. It's 2.5 miles to Johnson's Village. Primarily class 3, depending on flow. This is a photo of us first run of the season last year. I think this was in February, something like that. Sorry if you hear the squeaking. My dog is out of control. So there is a crux drop on the run, though. It is not just primarily class 3. It would be like on par with just the fractions for like a quick after work run, but there is a dam in the middle of the stretch that feeds an irrigation ditch. It's known as the Silver Bullet. It's been rebuilt probably 4 times in the last 6 years to try to create a successful solution. I think at the time that I took this photo, it was probably a better design than what it is right now. They've been dealing with this boat chute on the right becoming a keeper hydraulic, essentially. It keeps digging out the bottom of the riverbed and creating a recirculating hydraulic there. And then the river left side is just like the head gate, basically, to a dam. It's a really steep drop. You need a lot of water to not end up stuck up against a concrete wall over there. So that's kind of the sucky part of that run, but it is a nice little after work stretch for those of us that live in town here. Once you get down to Johnson's Village, you begin what's known as the Milk Run. Milk Run is 6 miles from Johnson's Village to Ruby Mountain. This is actually the other side of the Silver Bullet drop. Once you go down the boat chute, this is the eddy that you would put in if you portaged it. And then you've got a nice class 3 run out until you get underneath the water pipe down there. But yeah, the Milk Run, putting in at Johnson's Village, 6 miles to Ruby Mountain. It's our backyard float here. There is no good access, unfortunately, at Johnson's Village. That's why it lists, I think, in a lot of the guidebooks, the Milk Run is starting in Buena Vista. But the character of the run through what the BV Town Run to Johnson's Village is way different than the Milk Run. So just know that if you ever go up to go do a family float or something, don't put in at BV, put in Johnson's Village. There are 2 outfitters there that do allow access: American Adventure Expeditions and Wilderness Aware Rafting. They each have very nice boat ramps. That run is basically class 2 also. Earl, that ran CKS here forever, used to like to call it the toughest class 2 run in Colorado. But that's when we used to have more water in the river. It's class 2, some nice gravel bars and beaches and places to train on easy waves. The first part's got some bushes on the sides and is where most of the gradient is, probably in the first like half mile. Once you get below that point of it, it's pretty easy to work on skills, do roll practice, self-rescue, things of that nature. There are access points along the Milk Run as well, which we do a town float, or we used to, at least before COVID. It was called the Float to the Grill. River Runners is just across the road. This is Milk Run also in the fall. Milk Run, another access point for it is at Fisherman's Bridge, and right across the river from Fisherman's Bridge is where River Runners is at. River Runners as well allows public access. They have got a bar and grill and do live music during the summer, usually like 3 or 4 nights a week. So it's kind of a happening scene. It's a little bit more crowded than it used to be a couple of years ago, but they have good food and really good margaritas. And it's a fun trip to put in at Johnson's Village, take a lunch break at River Runners, have some tacos and a margarita, and then finish the rest of your trip out to Ruby Mountain. It's about halfway through the run. Once you get down below River Runners, though, there are 2 rapids there. They're a little bit tougher. I still call them 2+3-. They call one Ruby Ripple and the other one's at a fish hatchery there. Nothing too difficult with either one. A lot of times the locals will put somebody out on that stretch for their first time to run a rapid in a raft to see how they respond. So that is basically the extent of the Milk Run. There's not really any camping along it. You've got Little Cambodia, which is an informal name for private property that's located about halfway through the Milk Run. It's where a lot of the River Runner guides camp through the summer. They've got a really nice boat ramp, a great eddy and place to stop and kind of hang out People are always friendly there, but it is private property. So just be aware of that if you do that run and choose to stop in an area that sounds like that. So Browns Canyon is the next run. Once you get down, like a lot of people launch even at Fish Bridge for Browns Canyon. Ruby Mountain is traditionally the low water put in. Commercial rafts are not legally allowed by their agreement with the state park to put in at Ruby Mountain unless flows are under, I believe it's 600 CFS, 500 CFS, something like that, just because it makes for too long of a day with the guests. But the Ruby Mountain boat ramp is not as large, so it gets crowded quick. Browns Canyon has multiple length options depending on where you put in and where you take out. The longest option is from Fish Bridge to Stone Bridge, which is 13 miles. Fish Bridge to Hecla is 9.5. Ruby to Stone is 11. And Ruby to Hecla is 7.5. That's most commonly the stretch that I do. Mini rapids in Browns Canyon, for those of you that have not been there before. The one that we're looking at in this photo is Zoom Flume, but this is at a pretty low water level. This is a family that I'm friends with here in BV. They got their dog out there with them. I'm guessing this is probably it's probably like 400, maybe 500 CFS, something like that. Variety of rapids though in Browns Canyon. They've got colorful names, including Pinball, Zoom Flume, Big Drop, Staircase, Toilet Bowl, Raft Ripper, Seidel's Suckhole, Widowmaker. This is another photo at the bottom of Zoom Flume at low water. Like I said, we can get out there almost year round on the river here. Usually, actually, December is the only month that often we can't, sometimes January too. But that's it. This is a run out of Zoom Flume. There's a really nice beach on the bottom there where most people on their raft trips take a lunch break. A lot of good campsites as you go through the canyon. These are more Browns Canyon photos. It's really the only legit stretch on the Arkansas to do an overnight trip. You can camp on other stretches. There are other campsites. There's campgrounds that you can drive into and boat into as well. But Browns Canyon is really the only place that you can float in and set up a campsite and not be in sight or earshot of a road anywhere. Browns Canyon is also the most crowded section of river on the Arkansas and last I knew in the United States. It varies year to year. I did not write down the numbers, but I think it was on the order of 260,000 guests last year down the river in Browns Canyon, something like that. They always say it's at least 250,000. But beside that number, they're all in there at the same time. So you can have, you can definitely still have great trips in Browns Canyon. And generally speaking, the commercial rafts, they're not there to dilly-dally. They run through, they get from point A to point B. You know, you just expect them to be there and stay out of the way and have your own good time, and there's no issue at all. And that's on the crowded days. You go in the morning or in the evening or on a weekday that's not a holiday week, and there's probably not going to be hardly anybody in there. This photo right here is looking down on Hecla Junction, which is the main takeout for Browns Canyon, which has got a campground on the left side right there that you can see they just rebuilt a couple of years ago. It's a pretty nice little access. Oh, and this is camping. Yeah, nice campsites in there. It's a photo of mine. Night sky, clear night sky in there. Very little light pollution at all. The little bit that we have is from Salida there. This is Staircase. Staircase is a really, really fun set of rapids. I think there's like 7 of them total, but the last 4 are all legit class 3 drops in and of themselves, one after another. And I think it's also one of the more beautiful parts of the canyon. Yeah, so I didn't take any photos of Seidel's Suckhole. Seidel's Suckhole is below Hecla Junction. You've got another, I think, 2.5 miles from Hecla down to Stone Bridge. At higher flows in particular, it's offered as a full day trip, or some companies just run it saying they can add on two more rapids or whatever to their advertising. But Seidel's is the biggest rapid in Browns Canyon. It's at low flows, it's inconsequential, really. It's a large bedrock block in the center of the river that you just make an S turn around, and it does drop. It drops like 4 feet, something like that, 5 feet around the S turn. But at higher flows, you get a large recirculating hole there. It's a very common flip spot for boaters, just in general, raft dump trucks, that sort of thing. At high water years, from Hecla Junction, it's not very far away. It's about half, 3/4 of a mile downstream, something like that. And there's a trail that follows the river down to it. So during high water years, you'll get crowds of people that'll go out there with their lawn chairs and the cameras and watch the rafts come through and, cheer them on as they dump truck or whatever, and it's quite a scene. But it's also a fun rapid. It's a big hit and a lot of fun if you know the right lines. And then Stone Bridge, the takeout on that run, has a low bridge at really high water, flows over 3,800. It needs to be portaged on River Right. There are some signs about that on the river. And I should mention that for both the user experience and for conserving the resource, there are capacities set for the number of boaters allowed through Browns Canyon a day. At peak season, which is defined as May 15th to September 7th, there are 240 private boater boats, not people, but boats, allowed down the river a day. And commercials are allowed 360 boats down the river a day. I believe that the reason that there's a little bit more commercial allowed is because they're such a big part of our community, and to benefit the people that want to be able to go down the river and can't do it on their own.
Logan, yes, that's the only place I know that we used to joke about falling out of your boat, landing in somebody else's boat.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the only place I've ever been ran over by a raft. But so the only times that we've ever came close to exceeding capacity are during Paddle Fest weekend, which is a paddling festival that goes on Memorial Day weekend in Buena Vista every year. And then it's usually FIBARC weekend in Salida, which is generally Father's Day weekend. Although we've had one busy day this year that almost exceeded capacity. We haven't yet. But the deal in the management plan is that if we have 5 days in a season on the same stretch that exceed capacity, then they're going to start the process of a permitting program, which is it's going to start as a voluntary program to see if people will avoid the river on the days that capacities are being passed. And if that doesn't work, it may eventually end up going to a lottery permit, which I'm not a big fan of, but there was, it gets really, really crowded. I mean, they had over 200 private boaters in there and 300 commercials a couple of weeks ago. And I heard some stories about some debauchery and arguments and overflowing. So it's best to try to time it at not one of those times of the year. If you want to come do Browns, I encourage you to do it. It's a beautiful stretch of river. It flows for a very long period of time, but Memorial Day weekend and Father's Day weekend are probably not the two best times to do it. Yeah, I think that's about it for Browns. Any questions from anybody about Browns, access, rapids, capacity, anything like that?
I think I've seen on some of the signs they posted what times the commercials are usually at the put-ins, like up at the Numbers and maybe even at Ruby or some of the other runs. And it's best if you can get in before them, get your boat in the water, tie off well away from the put-in and give them plenty of room. And then when you get to the takeout, don't dilly-dally. They'll run you over. Get in, get out quick as you can.
That's actually where most of the arguments and issues occurs, in the parking lot and on the boat ramps. Unfortunately, the parking lot crowding, like I'm on the citizens task force, and I wrote this plan with the capacities and everything with the other group of people on this board. And, you know, it's meant to keep the experience from diminishing. And, you know, if we're having overcrowding in the parking lot, that may be what we have to address. You know, there's not any real documented issues so far, even with these really, really busy days, of like erosion or like, you know, people damaging trees, or that it's really having particularly negative effects on like the bighorn sheep or anything like that. So, you know, hopefully we won't end up with a permit system, but it's all on the books, and it seems like everything's just getting busier.
So how would you rate Browns Canyon, Class 4?
Depend on the flow. It is generally a Class 3 run. Really, you need over 2,000 CFS. You should probably have a little bit of Class 4 skills, really, but most of it, like I've taken a lot of people from out of state, and a lot of people that weren't even really very skilled whitewater boaters down Browns Canyon before, and they survived and had fun. Yes, Browns Canyon is fun. I encourage you all to boat it, and hopefully I get to boat it with you. So the Stone Bridge is the lowest takeout for Browns Canyon. Once you get below Stone Bridge, basically it's Stone Bridge to Salida is kind of all one run. That's 10 miles. 3 miles from Stone Bridge is Big Bend. Right before Big Bend, you have the only real rapid on that entire run. It's called Squaw Creek Rapid, where a small tributary comes in and you've got a gravel fan, and it pushes the river against the S-turn in the river. It's still very easy Class 3. It's beginner whitewater, really, like for people training on whitewater. At Big Bend, you've got nice access. There's a nice boat ramp. They just built a new one. Restrooms, no shade anywhere. And just upstream of there is an outfitter, Independent Whitewater, who has a food truck and serves alcohol. So you can stop there right before Big Bend. Drift In, I think, is what it's called. Get food. There's multiple places like that along the river. So the Big Bend to Salida run is the booze cruise or fishing float for most people that live in the Salida area. It's 7 miles. There are no rapids on the run. It's Class 2. There are rocks in the run, and I think it's probably 16 foot per mile or something like that gradient. It's not that steep. I've seen people do it in inner tubes. I've taken first timers on first time in the river, stand-up paddle boarders in it, and thrown people in duckies for the first time in it as well. But just like every other stretch in the river, as flows go up, it becomes swifter and more difficult. But it's still Class 2. There is a Lowhead Dam about half to 2/3 of the way through the run. It is a ugly Lowhead Dam. There is money that's been raised by the state park through lottery funds and other sources. This is the Big Bend stretch I'm talking about that's really good for fishing and just floating on. There's been some money raised for this dam right here. It is an old intake for the fish hatchery at Salida, but they don't even use it anymore. There's been people that have drowned on that left side recirculating Lowhead. I mean, it's got a huge boil on it, especially at higher water. There didn't used to be any signs, but they now got something that goes across the top and some warning signs that even light up in the dark, because the last people that perished in it actually floated in after dark. But the river left side, over where you can see there's a concrete pylon in there and water on the left of that, they've got a 3-stage boat chute over there, and they're easy drops. Very simple, straightforward. I would call them 2+, but they're probably class 3 because you have to go down and drop. But the state park raised a bunch of money, and then they got other money to rebuild this, and they're going to do what they did like at the Granite Dam I showed you earlier, where there's like 5 or 6 drops on one side, and the other side's going to become a fish ladder where it's just going to be graveled. It'll just be steep gravel through, so there's no actual low head to it anymore. But they got all the money secured, and then inflation hit, and the contractor said they need like another 2.5 million now. So last I knew, they were about halfway to trying to secure that part of it. Because this is actually the last impassable structure on the upper Arkansas River, other than the boat chute over here. So yeah, that's the Salida Play Park. And that's even not on all that busy of a day. But the Salida Play Park has got, it's a takeout for the run I was just referring to. Although there's a county road bridge just above town that a lot of locals use. It's got a small 1-lane dirt ramp that a lot of people use, County Road 160. It's referred to as Iron Bridge or Brown Bridge. A lot of locals use it so they don't have to try to take out at the play park because there's never any parking here. But the play park has got 4 features from top to bottom. I don't know what the middle 2 are called, but the upper one is the Office Wave and the lowest is the Scout Wave, which are the newest of them. But the one in this photo is the one where they hold the freestyle competitions during FIBARK, which used to be, at one point, I think they had the freestyle like national or world championships or something in it. But FIBARK's kind of fallen off from the Whitewater Festival scene a little bit. It's a little bit more of a county fair and gone from the tradition of old school slalom, lots of boat races, that kind of thing, to yeah, this is an old FIBARK photo running gates back in like the 50s. Now they've gotten to this kind of thing. This is what's called the hooligan race, where you put anything in the river that's not a boat, and whoever makes the biggest fools of themselves wins. It's also, they do live music, and they do boat races still. They still have some downriver stuff. Last time I went down, they were doing the junior national slalom championships, which was pretty cool. See, kids are like 14 and under doing slalom racing. But yeah, it seems like all the people come out for this kind of thing.
Is that what you were saying is happening this weekend, Father's Day weekend? It
is. Yep. That's going to be probably Saturday, 4 in the afternoon or something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So once you head downstream from Salida, you've got a really nice run. It's become a lot more popular because it's now the alternative town run to the people that don't just want to totally float. The Big Bend to Salida run basically is just a float other than that low head dam. Salida to Rincon has got a little bit of action in it. It's got, there's probably 5 or 6 named class 2+ rapids, depending on flow, and then 1 long class 3 rapid called Bear Creek. When you actually leave the Salida Whitewater Park, it is 2.5 miles to Salida East, which is, again, one of the points that a lot of the locals use because the access and parking at the play park is very poor. Salida East, though, is a nice site. It does not have very good shade. It can get hot, but it's got a big boat ramp, a lot of parking, and it's got a campground. And the state park is rebuilding the campground. They just rebuilt the boat ramp actually this spring, and now they're waiting until after Labor Day to finish the campground, making a lot of improvements there. The Rincon Run, once you get down past Bear Creek, you've got County Line and Typewriter Wave and Spider Rapid. And these are a bunch of just like basically class 2 features, but they're all going to be river wide features that have really good play potential to them. They're a lot of fun to surf, and traditionally this run was really popular with squirt boaters. At the Rincon Takeout, there's an island there where there's like 4 different splits of the river that all come back together and make a big whirlpool. And our local guy here that runs a distillery used to do the squirt boat world championships there every year, like for like 10 or 15 years. And it was pretty cool to go watch, see those guys squeeze in the glass boats and see how long they can hold their breath underwater. But beyond that, the Rincon Run has got some camping along it too. Point Bar Campground, which is the photo right here, was just rebuilt, and it's got both boat-in sites and drive-in sites on river left, about 3/4 of the way into the run, maybe a little more. A lot of the area has primarily been used by placer miners and recreational miners, which is why it's kind of called Point Bar. It's a rock point where they've been digging holes and filling them back in, basically. But I guess they pull gold out. But anyway, there's nice camping in that area. And then if you continue down to Rincon itself, there's a good boat ramp. They just rebuilt the boat ramp there, and there is camping as well. Also, not very much shade, but it's a good campsite right on the bank of the river if you don't mind being fairly close to the highway. Downstream from there, when you put in at Rincon, the next run down is to Valley Bridge. The first drop, like right after you leave Rincon, is called Badger Creek. It's not difficult at all. There's a long tributary that comes in right there. It doesn't usually carry very much water, but in the 70s, I believe it was, or the 60s, there was a giant flash flood, and it moved a huge, like Volkswagen sized boulder right in the center of its gravel fan. And so normally at most flows, you've got a clean run down the left side of Badger Creek Rapid, but at higher water, you got this giant block of rock right in the center that makes a huge pour over. It's something to behold and something to not float into. But the crux of the run is actually Tin Cup Rapid, which is what this photo is of. This is very low water of it. It's basically a ledge on river left. You've got a rock bar on the right that pushes the water to the left, and at lower flows, you get a ledge with a wave train right there. And at higher water, it just becomes a wave train down the center of the river. I don't think I said it, but the run itself is 8 miles. So that's the crux of an 8-mile run, with Badger Creek at the top. And then once you get past Tin Cup, you've got one more named rapid called Red Rocks. But it's really not really worthy of a name, in my opinion. It's a big alluvial gravel bar with an island, and you just have to pick your way around rocks or small holes at higher water. Apparently people have gotten into trouble there, or they wouldn't have named it, though. The next access point, once you launch at Rincon and go down 8 miles, is Valley Bridge. Valley Bridge has got some boat-in campsites, which are the only actual designated boat-in campsites on the entire Arkansas River, at least that are owned by the state park. There's a nice little, nice eddy. You can see the river in the distance in that photo right there. It's not that far, probably 30 or 50 yards at the most from the sites. And it's a good way to break up a multi-day down the river. Because upstream and down, there are quite a few camping spots, but this is a good place if you wanted to try to make a marathon out of the river while you're there. You know, maybe start at Browns Canyon and go all the way through the Royal Gorge or something. This would be a legit place. You could you can't drive the vehicle to the campsite, but you could leave it 100 yards away in the parking lot and come over and resupply or whatever. So Valley Bridge is the launch for another run. This next one is 5 miles long, and the takeout of it is Trading Post. it's also class 2. Basically, it runs through what they call the Pleasant Valley Fault. You can kind of get an idea from this photo here that, you know, you're not in a tight canyon. But it's basically where the Arkansas River leaves the Sawatch Range and starts following the Sangre de Cristos instead. This is another photo of it. Kind of shows you how big the valley is rather than being a canyon. This is in the Howard Coaldale area here. I think we went down and we're boating in like February or January just to get our day for the month. But the run itself really doesn't have much to speak of. There's a rapid about halfway through called Boulder Garden, but if it was really about anywhere else on the river, it wouldn't even have a name. I've heard it should be named like Sangre View or something like that, because you've actually got really good views of the mountains at the rapid. But it's just a bunch of a handful of rocks in the river with no real gradient. You just have to maneuver around them or miss the holes at high water. The crux on the run is Cottonwood and Little Cottonwood Rapids, which are towards the very end of it. Trading Post is actually back in a canyon again. When you leave the Pleasant Valley where Howard and Coaldale are, you very dramatically go back into a very steep walled and sheer rock walled canyon. It's pretty amazing, actually. You go from grassy banks like this, like straight into a canyon walls. And right where those canyon walls constrict on you is where Cottonwood Rapid is. Cottonwood Rapid is considered class 3 still. Depending on the flow, I would definitely say it could be 3+ to 4- at really high water, but it is a straight shot through it. This is a picture of a friend who's a fishing guide, Larry Fredericks, running Cottonwood Rapid at a lower flow. The place that he is at right there makes a river-wide standing wave at high water. If you do that stretch, since it's out of character with the run above it and don't want to run that rapid, you can take out at the Bighorn RV Park and Campground, which is, it's real obvious. It's right on the side of the highway right there before you go into the canyon or out of the canyon. And they are boater friendly. I've used them for access before without camping there. And Colorado Whitewater was talking with them about doing a camp there at one point or another. So they're boater friendly. Once you get through Cottonwood Rapid, you've got one more. It's called Little Cottonwood on the corner below it. Not as hard as this one. Basically, it's just a big black rock in the left side of the river that you have to maneuver around, or at higher flows avoid the hole that it makes. But it is class 3. Trading Post is a nice site. I've used it before multiple times and always wanted to relax there while I was there. It's by the side of the highway, but it's got mature trees and nice picnic sites, and directly across the river from it is a pretty steep cliff wall rock face where I've seen bighorn sheep multiple times. So it can be a pretty pleasant place even just to stop if you're cruising through on the highway and relax for a minute. The next stretch, putting in at Trading Post, which not many people run just this stretch, but the next access point is down to Lone Pine, which is 5 miles. Shortly below Trading Post, you go through the town of Cotopaxi, which is what we're looking at now. There's a bridge there. At really, really high water, it can become an issue. But I've been through there at almost 5,000 CFS and didn't hit my head. So I think they say 6,500 you have to portage it. But that is the takeout now for the Fibark Downriver race. They put in Salida and they run down, I think it's 27 miles to the bridge here. And they're, although it's a takeout for a race, it does not have very good access. So don't plan on using Cotopaxi as an access point. It's a pain in the ass and not good. The stretch, though, from Trading Post to Lone Pine has got several class 2 rapids. They've got a little character to them, and they've got some names too, but they're class 2. They're very easy. They're fun at higher flows in particular. Usually if I go down and float that stretch, it's with friends and with playboats at really, really high water, like peak water. You get wave trains through there with no consequence to them at all. So it can be really fun for training on high water without having any major rapids to run. The Lone Pine site has a couple of boat ramps and a couple of picnic sites, but as you can guess by the name Lone Pine, it is not very shaded either. Most of these sites are basically right beside Highway 50. There's not much space between the highway and the access points, but they've done a good job at a lot of them to try to tuck the boat ramp behind a rock outcrop or to put some trees between them or something like that. The next stretch is Lone Pine to Texas Creek, which is 6 miles, still class 2. There is one rapid at the end, which is Texas Creek Rapid, which is class 3, but the boat ramp's above it, so most people don't run it on that run. There is an undeveloped dirt boat ramp on the river left at Texas Creek. It used to be free. I believe it probably still is, but I know there was some landowner issues with that. So the state park just constructed a new boat ramp upstream of the Texas Creek Bridge. I might have a photo of Texas Creek here. Just upstream of the Texas Creek Bridge on River Right. Not a whole lot of amenities at it, but it is a good access point. This is another look at the river around Cotopaxi. Class 2 water, as I had mentioned. This is a private camp in between, basically between Cotopaxi and Texas Creek, or Lone Pine and Texas Creek, either way. You got 2 private camps in there. There is a Cotopaxi KOA and Sweetwater River Ranch. They're both RV oriented, but they have very nice beach frontage and river access. In this photo, you can see the Sangre de Cristos off in the distance as the river flows away from them. This is the Texas Creek Bridge. I put them in the wrong order. But yeah, this is a Texas Creek Bridge that you drive across to get to the boat ramp that we used to use. And you can kind of see in the right side, the beginning of Texas Creek Rapid, pretty easy class 3. It just has one pretty good little wave hole at decent flows that can flip a boat over, but there's plenty of room to go around it as well. The next run below is Texas Creek to Pinnacle Rock. This is 6 miles, starts to get a little bit more lively than the last couple stretches above it. Yes, I already said Texas Creek Rapid. Next thing you come across is primitive camping and a boat ramp at the Maytag access, which is really badly, if signed at all, from the highway. You'd have to almost drive by and see it and turn around and come back to it if you don't know it's there. But there's a little dirt road that goes off to the side, and you've got enough room for a couple of campsites and a rough, but you've got a dirt ramp down to the river there. And this is just about a half a mile above the same named rapid, Maytag. There's 2 Maytags on the arc. There's one up in the Granite Stretch and one down here. This Maytag Rapid is very rocky, especially on the right side. It's a result of the railroad building. They moved the river into an artificial channel when they built the railroad along the stretch right there. And so it's pushed up against a rock outcrop more than it would be naturally. And you've got kind of a rocky drop with usually a good channel on the left, but it can become pretty splashy at higher flows. Photo we're looking at here is a short ways below Maytag. I've always called it Windy Corner. I'm sure the raft guides have got a lot better name for it, but the river goes to the left all the way around the rock formation and then makes a 190-degree turn and goes back or 180-degree turn and goes back the other direction on the other side of it. And usually as you go around the edge of that rock, you can get blasted with some pretty strong headwinds. And once you get around that corner, you're right on Three Forks Rapid, which is, this is a photo of this stretch with a little bit more water in it. Kind of changes character. Not a lot of gradient, but it still stays nice and splashy through it. Three Forks Rapid, I don't have a good photo of. It's a very long rapid, has multiple islands in it, and a bridge abutment, like a concrete pillar in the center of the rapid, like kind of right where the crux of the rapid would be. Generally, it's really messy and the river gets wide, and it's a difficult run, particularly for rafts at lower flows. A lot of people don't even do that stretch below certain levels. I don't know what their cutoff would be, but I'd guess 600 or 800 or something to go through there. But overall, there's not a ton of gradient to it. It's route finding and keeping it upright. So Three Forks is the last rapid on that stretch before you come around a couple more corners and you're at Pinnacle Rock. Pinnacle Rock is the beginning of the Parkdale Run. Parkdale Run is the standard class 3 run of the lower river. Fractions and Browns Canyon are kind of the standard class 3 of the upper river, although they have quite different character to them. And they both have quite different character than Parkdale does. Parkdale's a fun run. It goes at very low flow also. It is a place, as you can see, there's snow on the ground here that you can go when you get a warm day in March or February and have a great day on the river. It's lower elevation than Buena Vista by 1,000 feet or more, so it's quite a bit warmer. The run from Pinnacle Rock to Parkdale is 8.5 miles. It's considered cleat 3-4, particularly dependent on flow. There are some additional access points. Your first major rapid that you come across is Three Rocks. This photo right here is Shark's Tooth at like really, really low water. It's further down in the run. But Three Rocks is your first major rapid that you come across, and it is also the crux of the run. It's comparable in the amount of carnage that it generates. This is a friend in Spikebuck back when we used to have really high water. That's like 6,000, 7,000 CFS in the river there. This is Three Rocks at a respectable level. You get a pretty good river wide hole there. And a lot of people dump truck at it. And since it's beside the highway, you get a lot of people that sit up on the side of the highway with lawn chairs and just watch the rafts come through and see every fourth or fifth one flip over and cheer them on. At lower flows, though, it's really not anything that bad at all. You've got exposed boulders in the middle of the river there. I don't know if I have a photo of it at lower water. No, that's gorge. Then you've got a variety of other class 3 rapids below there and access points. Once you get below Three Rocks Rapid, the next access point is called Salt Lick. It's very basic. There's really nothing for amenities there. It's just a parking lot with access to the river. I think commercial raft companies primarily use it to put in or take out, like put in after Three Rocks or take people out after they've had a carnage event. Then your next access is going to be 5 Points, which has got a campground. 5 Points has actually got a observation deck. It's not very big, but a little deck that goes out over the top of 5 Points Rapid, which is a nice, fun, pretty long class 3 wave train. It goes right under the deck, but there's not really any good river access there. There's no ramps. They've got rock lined banks. So, I mean, you can put in a kayak easily, but it's not a good place for a raft. But there is a campground there, and it's a decent campground. It's on the other side of the highway, though, from from the river itself. There is big cottonwoods with good shade there though. So it's a decent campsite. Then once you get down below there, you've got some more class 3 rapids. Spikebuck, which was this big water photo, can definitely be considered class 4 at higher flows. Shark's Tooth, Double Dip, Satan's Suckhole. There's a couple other ones with some names through there too. They're basically all straightforward class 3 rapids at most flows though. It's really kind of backyard class 3 run for any paddlers that might live in like the Canyon City, Pueblo area, and a lot of folks even from Colorado Springs. That's their closest place to get on class 3 water. So, all right, next up's the Royal Gorge. Royal Gorge starts at Parkdale, goes down to Canyon City, 11 miles, I believe, to Centennial Park. You've got an alternate access point just above that. There's a sneak spot too that people use that I don't know how to describe it good enough to tell you in this meeting to use. But then there's a place called the Pink House as well that's up near the confluence of Grape Creek. But at this point, I believe only commercials are allowed to use that site. So boaters running the Royal Gorge currently, I believe, need to take out at Centennial Park in Canyon City, which is a nice park. It's got a boat ramp. They've got adequate parking, mature cottonwood trees, grass, restrooms, all that kind of stuff. Royal Gorge is one of the stretches I'm not the most familiar with. I've probably only ran it 6 to 8 times, something like that, in the 15 plus years I've been here. But it is a class 3-4 run. At lower flows, it boats primarily as class 3. I don't know for sure, but I would guess that probably around 2000 CFS, it starts to change in character. That's kind of the flow for most places on the Arkansas River. When it exceeds about 2000, things start to get pushier, the holes get stickier, that kind of thing. It definitely is continuous solid for at high flows. I've heard of people running it at 5,000 CFS plus, and at that point it's just haystack wave trains all the way through it. But the biggest rapids in the run are Sunshine Falls, Sledgehammer, Narrows, Wall Slammer, and Boat Eater, which all have got separate character to them. Sunshine Falls is the first major rapid that you're going to come on. You have a couple of easier class 3s before you get to that point. El Segundo and El Primero, I believe, what they call them. And then at Sunshine, a lot of people will port a Scout. You can get out on River Right. There's an old decrepit water pipe there that used to be the drinking water supply for the town of Canyon City. And kind of the accepted method of scouting is that you climb up on this big pink rock and you walk out on the water pipe and look at the rapid. But there's other ways to look at it too. And it's worth looking at a lot of flows. It used to be considered class 5 20 years ago. But the crux of the rapid itself is a river-wide rock bar at the bottom of like an S-turn. And there used to be an upright rock in there that made like a pin spot and a terminal hole behind it. And in the super high water year of 95, which is I think when it went up to like 6,000 or 7,000, that rock actually rolled over. And they changed it from class 5 to class 4 at that point because it made it significantly easier. So that's the crux drop in the gorge. But once you get through Sunshine, you're almost immediately into Sledgehammer, which has got a couple of pretty good drops. One of which is referred to as Clark's Hole, and it's up against a river right wall, generally a place you don't want to be. This is a run, if you're unfamiliar with and you're going in as a private boater, you're going to want to have somebody with you that knows the run. Same thing with numbers. Fractions, Browns Canyon, Parkdale, you can, and everything in between, you can probably get away if you're solid class 3 boater or confident class 3 boater. You probably get away with all of those without any kind of guide or anything. Royal Gorge, Numbers, Pine Creek, you need to have someone to show you where you're going, first time at least. Or maybe you don't need to, but I would. After Sledgehammer, you go through the Narrows, which is a really tight spot because there's still a railroad through the Royal Gorge. It's a really tight spot where you've got a rail line, you've got the tourist trap of the Royal Gorge Bridge above. They have a narrow gauge line that comes down from the rim to the river level that they call the punch bowl. It's I don't even know, it's got to be like a 25-30% gradient, like cog that they bring people down on, and they watch you coming through the rapid. And that's right at the end of the Narrows and before you get into the next major rapid called Wall Slammer, which has like a giant gravel fan that pushes the entire current up against a solid rock wall on the right that's undercut towards the end of it. Got a couple of holes through there to avoid, and they all try to push you into the wall at the right. And it's easy to flip over and have your boat go up in the undercut and then not be able to get a roll. It's not like a lethal undercut, but it's one that's easy to swim out of. A lot of people do that. And below there, I'm not super familiar with what's what on the river, though. I know we've got a place called Corner Pocket and Boat Eater, which Boat Eater I know only comes in at really high flows, which I haven't seen. Corner Pocket is got a nice little beach camp on the right that is like the only real legit place to stop for a lunch, a significant break in the Royal Gorge and be comfortable at all. And it's also kind of the end of the crux action of the run. Once you get below there, you've got a couple of class 3 rapids, Lion's Head or something like that's one of them. And then you go through a couple of like low head diversion dams before you get into Canyon City, but they're not true low heads. They get boated a lot. And one of them has got a real small boat chute on the side of it. They're all real well signed and really shouldn't be, unless you're just not paying attention, they're not anything that should be of concern. Once you get down to Canyon City, you do not want to continue on past there. There are a couple of there's Oil Creek diversion, which is like a rocky diversion dam that just doesn't have a line through it at all. And then you've got a true low head dam near, I believe it's near the Portland cement plant. But you can put in at Florence, which is just downstream a ways. I know they've got Pathfinder Park there. And then there is also, I believe, a brand new river access underneath the highway bridge as you're coming off of Highway 50 down into the town of Florence with river access for the lowest boatable stretch on the upper Arkansas, which is referred to as Swallows Canyon. It's class 2. There are no rapids in it, but you do have gravel bars. You've got some decent scenery. It's the last breath of the Rocky Mountains. You boat through the Dakota Hogback that creates Skyline Ridge, and it's also the same buckling that makes Red Rock Park and all that. But then you'd have to take out at Pueblo Reservoir is the deal. But they've got access at the inlet into the lake. So if you're okay with paddling out on a little bit of flat water, it could be a very pretty run, especially at the right time of year. Lots of cottonwood trees through there, and there's supposed to be a lot of birds. So birds and wildlife. That's what that run would be all about. Okay. That's really about all I had on the Ark. I thank you guys for listening to me talk about all that. Any questions on the Ark before? No, I think we're right at 8:30. I think the time to good. Any questions? This is the Canyon City Whitewater Park. I didn't tell you that. Canyon City just built a whitewater park in the last probably 5 years. They 2 or 3 waves. They've been putting up gates. And I've heard pretty good things about it. Actually, I haven't been to it myself, but people seem to like it. And this is a Swallows Canyon run here that I was telling you about. You basically into more just like buff, low hills, that kind of thing. Pueblo Reservoir, the dam at it. And more high water on the numbers.